Hello everyone, welcome to our session, Code Last, a practical guide to resilient applications. This is basically a story of and techniques of something that both myself and James have developed when we build applications on the ServiceNow platform. It's not a way of telling you how you should do it, just a way that works really well for us, so I hope you find it useful.
Everyone having good knowledge? Wow, I'm loud. Hey. Welcome.
He is the noisy one.
To a voiceover. Code Last. Yeah. Anyway.
Make a start.
Do the click. Right. Click the arrow.
How else if I use the...
Technical challenges.
So my name is Tim Attenborough. I am a wearer of many hats at Whitespace Studios. I kind of do development, architecture work, management, all sorts of stuff. I've been in ServiceNow for around about 7 years now, particularly around integrations, complex integrations, ticket exchange, a lot of custom dev work, but a lot of ITSM stuff as well. 2 times hackathon winner. Got a couple of store apps and a couple of share apps as well.
That's me. It's my mug, James Neal. I am also a wearer of many hats. I keep them stored very neatly. And yeah, what I do is primarily product development, build apps for the store, and I love getting my hands dirty in code. Again, 7 years in the platform, 15 years or so in kind of web development, technologies, PHP and other stuff like that. Yeah, again, hackathon winner. Got 2 store apps, 4 share apps. If you haven't seen the share apps, go and have a look at them because they're really, really useful. And I can say that because I wrote some of them. So we've got TBC on current projects. Yeah, sorry guys, we forgot to put what current projects we're working on. We're just doing some fun stuff, but we'll move on to that.
So as we said, we work for a company called Whitespace Studios. We are actually the founders. We are a ServiceNow technology partner. We like to build applications for the store. That's kind of what we specialize in. And like I said, this is a kind of bit of a story of the techniques that we've developed and kind of issues that we've come across in building applications, and hopefully it'll help you to build more resilient applications yourself. So we're going to kick it off, and I don't know how many of you were involved in kind of application development before you got to ServiceNow, but I used to do kind of like web app type stuff before, and you could spend easily half your time just trying to get your web app up and running. Is my Tomcat server on? Is my queue running? Is everything up? And just lots of config, messing around, tinkering, getting things to set up. And it's just a waste of time. So all of that time, it's kind of like swimming in an ocean. It's very, very difficult. It's not easy to build.
I hope you can appreciate our graphics, by the way. We spent a lot of time on these. The photography was quite hard.
So when you come into ServiceNow, it's like a dream, isn't it? It's on the beach with your cocktail. It's so easy. Not all of that kind of techie stuff is handled. It's always available. You've got super availability, just falls over to other data centers. They're going to handle all of the performance side of things. Just a really easy platform to get in, build an app straight away. You don't have to worry about any of that techie stuff. Certainly made my life a lot easier when I was doing that. However, danger still lurks. It's easy to get complacent. So even though you've got this amazing platform and it's really easy to get in and start building, you've still got to put a bit of thought in what you're doing and still be a little bit careful. Yeah,
it's as we say here, it is very easy to get complacent, and I'm sure many of you have been burnt by development that's been done in the platform because it's so easy to build on, and you come to support it later on and you realize, how do I support this?
So one of the common things you kind of see from this is, you can't see the wood for the trees. It's easy just to dive straight in. Guilty of this in the past. I've got an amazing platform, I've got an amazing idea, straight into that script include, bang out 200 lines before lunch, everything's going great. But when you get to that, you're so, invested and so deep down in the nitty-gritty code that you might be missing where you need to go, and you might have veered off path without really realizing it. It's very, very difficult when you're in that kind of position to understand, maybe you've made a mistake or maybe something's not going quite right.
Show of hands, how many of you have spent, a day writing a script or something, building something, and then got to the end of it and gone, I need to throw all of this away, or I need to start again? Yeah.
Yep.
All been there. So it's making sure, so knowing that is half the battle, accepting that.
Yeah. and you usually end up in this kind of situation. Not a good place. And kind of just touched on that as well, but I think we need to go back onto it. There's this thing, like it's an investment. It's when you've spent time and effort investing in some code, even if you realize it's wrong, even if you realize you need to chuck it away, it's very, very, very hard. You start, I'll just tinker with it, I'll just adapt it, I'll tweak it, I'll make it work.
You power through.
Power through. And that might get you over the first hurdle, but then on the second and the third and the fourth, and all of a sudden, where you started is miles away from where you've ended up, and actually the code is just not fit for purpose anymore, and it's just incredibly difficult to maintain. But this is really real. Once you put time and effort into something, it's very hard to go back, very hard to change. But there's a new way. Well, there's a new way that we've discovered, and it works very well for us, and we'd like to share that with you. First thing, code last. Avoid the temptation to dive right in. I still catch myself doing this at times, like, no, step back. It's really, really difficult to do, but you must. If you want to build something what's going to stand the test of time and last and be extensible and all the good stuff that you want, you really do need to avoid this temptation.
Yep.
Something else that we've adapted, 2 heads are better than 1. So we like to kind of employ a technique of paired development. It's counterintuitive. It feels like it's a waste. It feels like, well, I'm wasting 2 resources on the same thing when I can have 1. But actually what we found with experience is it's way better. Decisions are made much more quickly, and they're much more informed decisions. And you can just cover all of the angles. It's so easy when you talk to somebody and they come up with something, it's like, oh, yeah, I didn't think of that. That completely changes the dynamic of what you're trying to build. We do it all the time. And it's how we work. You need to kind of temper this a little bit. What I'm saying is that if you want to configure your incident form, you need 2 people on there to decide where you put in the priority field, or you might need that. But certainly with complex application design, definitely at the beginning, during the design phase, it's really important, super, super critical.
Well, I think, on the development side there, we've spoken about this a lot, and we've had some kind of, people have their own opinions on this. As we're saying, it can seem like a waste. It can seem like I can't put 2 billable people on this at this time because, I just don't have that available. And it might, that's not the point. It's not that you've got 2 people working on the same computer doing it. That is a great way to do things. I'm sure many of you have done that. It's more about this upfront idea that I don't ever go anything alone. If whatever I'm doing, I'm consulting with someone who I trust and who has slightly different experiences with me, and that can throw up a whole load of things. I think because we're in ServiceNow, it's very easy just to jump in and say, yeah, well, I can build that. There's so many ways to do things in ServiceNow, and I've been guilty of this myself. You get in, you build what you think is needed, and you probably see this with story development as well. The story comes in, you build what's there, goes to the user. I didn't ask for that. So having a different opinion up front, and getting it agreed. You can build this into your development release cycle and all that kind of stuff. It's just something that we've figured out the hard way.
Yep.
Is really pay attention to that. And I think if you can emphasize the importance on having 2 or 3 or 4 heads on something, for even if it's a small amount of time, even if it's just a conversation over a coffee, it will pay dividends in the long run. You can, yes.
How do you do that if you're the only sole developer on a project?
So the question was, how do you do that if you're the only sole developer on a project? Is that right? It's a very good question. It's very hard to. You can't. I think in that case, you must have friends in the community, and it would be a case of, can I jump on Skype or Slack or something? Can I run an idea by you? Just take 10 minutes. That's all it really takes.
Different points of view on it. Even if the person is not necessarily very technical, I think just being able to speak to somebody, it's almost like speaking to the wall, isn't it? You're just voicing it out, and then you might see another angle that you've not seen before. It's definitely worth taking the time if you can. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely, exactly.
We haven't actually managed to buy any rubber ducks yet, but
next time.
Has anyone actually got a rubber duck? You do?
Has anyone actually learned it?
Oh. Brilliant.
So by kind of doing this as well, you want to try and take a look at the bigger picture. So we're not meaning a kind of waterfall design here. We're not meaning like designing absolutely everything all the way through. Still, we can take this with an agile approach, but I don't know about yourselves, one of the things I find very difficult, certainly with an agile methodology, is what am I really trying to do? And I've got a bunch of stories, and I can read through the stories, and they all kind of make sense, and they've got individual bits of functionality that I need to do, but what is the bigger picture? Like, what is the ultimate case that I'm really trying to do here? And you need to understand that, because you can build a whole bunch of stories in isolation and do it very quickly, but if you're missing that link of what the outcome is, it's really, really hard to kind of make the right decision, the right design. So take the opportunity to do the bigger picture.
Outcome is absolutely key there, and it's actually, it's funny enough part of the messaging that we're seeing here at Knowledge, and starting as that as a base, get what is the outcome that I need, and you can work back from that to design the solution that works.
You don't need to know everything up front. It can still be a very agile project and new things are going to come out, but just try and get a feel of what the big picture is to start with, and try and draw out this overall process to start. And that will definitely set you up for a much better application going forwards. Process flow diagramming. Every single one of our applications now, or our big projects where we're trying to design something, starts off like this. We work out exactly what you want, what processes you're implementing. Well, we choose to do this in Visio, but whatever kind of diagramming tool works for you. The beauty about doing this is that you can run through all the process, run through the decision points, start to call out what's going to happen, and if you get to the end and I forgot about that, there's like a key issue here that I've forgotten about at the end, and it completely and utterly redesigns my diagram, maybe 10-15 minutes of dragging some boxes around and reorganizing it. That 200 or 300 line script include that you wrote, you'd have just been trying to adapt that and tweak it to do something it shouldn't have done. But by doing it in a diagram, you get to see that bigger picture much more easily, and it's very, very simple to modify and tweak. There's less investment in that diagram. It's really, really simple to modify.
Yep.
I don't know how clear it is up there, but the next thing that we like to do then is we then start to kind of call out different things that we want to highlight through. So what functions are we going to be calling in different places? So on the diagram, we're starting to put little call-outs. Yeah, we want to do this here, we want to do that there. We're using like sub-processors to break out more complicated logic. So if there's like a bit of a complicated piece in the diagram, we'll worry about that later. We can just do a subflow, like a sub-process for that. And it just starts to build up the structure, the picture of what your application is going to look like.
And that's kind of from a coding perspective. I mean, we haven't kind of shown it completely on this diagram, so apologies for that. But because we've defined the flow here, we can then go in and think about, okay, this helps define my script structure. So each one of those boxes can be a function. And that then falls into line with coding best practices where one function does one thing, single responsibility. And where does stuff, my changes that happen, or my checks for things, it immediately becomes very clear as to what I need to check. Does that need an additional function? And you can start to map these things out. You can group them together into like kind of objects, and that can then feed into how you build your script includes. And I think, in fact, we've got the examples in a minute, haven't we?
Yeah, we use some UML diagramming. We just like to start to call out the tables that we're going to use in our application. So we build out the process flow, and from that we can start to see, have some ideas of what the tables are based upon where that process is going, what data we need to capture. So we'll draw out our tables, draw out what the fields we need, start to kind of highlight what the choice values are, and then we can go back into these diagrams, and then we can start to put what the different choices may be in different places. So our states of our records may tie into the processes that we have in here. And we're just starting to build out our table structure before even touching ServiceNow. So no fields are created, just build out our tables. Again, very easy to change and modify. Maybe that table, we started with it, it's not relevant anymore, just we get rid of it.
The great thing with doing all of this as well is, of course, documentation. How many of you rely on just the documentation being the product itself? I mean, I've certainly done that in the past, but doing this approach and being kind of a bit more strict about it, you're going to have something at the end of it before you've even started. And that's a really great thing to have. You don't get to the end of the project and it's like, oh, I've got to write all my documentation, or how did I build that? Or if you try and, you backwards document the script include that you wrote that's 1,000 lines long, how does everything time together? And you'll then try and explain the diagram, and it'll become a mess, and you'll think, then you'll want to start refactoring, all sorts of things. So doing this up front, it just saves a lot of time in the long run. And of course, you can use this with that, as that kind of coffee chat, and say, what do you think about this? Does this make sense? Does this field sit on this table, or do we need to break that out to a relationship, or does this process flow fit what is needed with the customer?
As developers, our documentation is always immaculate and done on time.
Yes.
For clients, usually tends to be the case. We're pretty good in that respect. But when you're building things internally, when it's for you, there's a bit less pressure to deliver that documentation. So, and then when the next guy comes to pick it up,
which is you in 6 months' time, and you've forgotten about it.
It's good to have. Another great thing that this leads into, and something we kind of discovered as we were going through, is how it leads on to how, structuring our scripts, structuring our program. So object orienteering. We create those tables, we decide what tables that we want, and then what we've decided to do is to actually create script includes for each of the tables we have in our application. And it just fell out straight away how simple and easy this was then to identify where all of my functionality needs to reside. So all those kind of function calls we were calling out on those diagrams, they just reside on the kind of table objects that they correspond to. Very, very easy and clear to see where they all sit.
It revolutionizes this whole model of traditional developing, which is I have my utils 1, I have my utils 2, I have my utils 3, and I've got another util script that does something else. And I've put a method in the util 1, but actually I need that in util 3 as well. What do I do there? It gives everything context. And from experience, this has made life so much easier. We've got super complex applications that things just fall into place because you've got the context already given. And it's like, I need to do this with this object. It goes on my script object that relates to that. And it becomes a very easy way to read your code as well. So when you're reading through, I'm not reading utils, some crazy long function name, and a billion parameters going in. It's because it's on this object, it's doing this thing, nice and easy.
I've been developing for quite a while, and I've done a fair bit of object-oriented programming, and this has actually really kind of gone proper object-oriented nirvana. It's I've had a few good stabs at it in the past, but building applications in this way within ServiceNow, you get it. You really see the true power of a proper object-oriented program when you come to upgrade and update and extend. And we'll start to talk some of that now. So, extensible. That kind of house usually looks like the util scripts when you start to extend them a few times. You want to avoid that. It gets very, very cumbersome, very, very difficult to maintain. It's not sustainable. By having a true object-oriented program, that all kind of goes away. It's very, very easy, intuitive where new functionality needs to sit. Just very logical, very simple to extend and add new functionality.
And even when you onboard people and they want to figure out what you did, it's easy. It's all as we say, it's contextual, it's intuitive, it's logical. They can read through your code, assuming you're doing proper commenting and all that kind of stuff as well. It just makes it so much easier to understand. That's over there. Yep, that link's over there. Great. And again, something we've seen before. Just people getting up to speed on stuff that they have had zero context of or knowledge before that day, and they come at the end of it and go, yeah, that's great. That's really clever. Yeah. So, really, really useful.
Testing. Testing's an important one. Try and write your test before you can code. It's difficult. It's not always an easy thing to do, but it really gets you again to think about what you're doing. It's almost like that pair development. If you start to write tests before you dive in, you might actually uncover some functionality you didn't think of the first time around, and then you can cater for that when you do it. Test before production. If you don't test properly, you can get some expensive and pretty catastrophic cases, and it's amazing how many times we see stuff which has not been very well tested goes into prod and falls over pretty quickly.
Is anyone in here wearing the old testing production T-shirt? I've seen a few of those floating around. Just try and avoid that. I think we always do. Ultimately, that is the best place. That's where the most testing comes out. It's the biggest use case. But if you can get any kind of, if you're doing business-driven development or any of the test-driven development kind of things, ServiceNow is getting a lot better at that. And what we're talking about here is not traditional kind of UI kind of testing, although that is really important. This is testing in your code. You can write scripts that say, I'm going to give an input, I expect this output. And there's a few tools out there that help you do that.
Yeah. So I want to take you through some examples of programs we built, applications we built using these techniques, and how that kind of worked for us. So we have, as I said, we're a bronze technology partner. We have an application on the store called Unify. Unify is an integration platform built on ServiceNow. Composes of 49 script includes around 15,000 lines of code. Trying to build and design that without this kind of process would have been impossible. So we've built Unify using these techniques, and we've extended it multiple times. It's like third or fourth version of ServiceNow it's now supported over, and it's been an absolute dream. It's been the easiest program I've ever built to support, just because it's truly object oriented. And
even though it's the most complex program you'll ever see, most likely.
Another example I want to cover is the polling element of Unify. So this is something that we did extend and developed. Designing the pub, 3 of us spent 3 hours designing this in the pub together. Built it in an afternoon, and it worked first time. And that's the honest truth. That's how it was.
We sat in the pub, we talked everything through, thrashed out a load of ideas, threw some away.
Visio.
Drew a Visio up, drew a few little pieces, and then we went away, filled in that kind of backfilled in the object side of things. So, okay, I've got this table that needs to be added. So in this case, we've got a polling table, so I've got a poller. So I'm going to have a poller script object. And then everything that's to do with the poller table that I need method-wise, function-wise, goes in that poller script object. And as you say, that because I then had Visio there to guide me, it was just, I open up Sublime, because I work in Sublime, sorry, and literally fleshed out the skeleton of all the scripts that we needed. All the methods go in. There's no code in there that, I'm not trying to solve any problems at that point. I'm fleshing out the skeleton. And that's really important. And you can very quickly get a real size of a scale of what you're building, and then you just go and backfill in. All the methods that you've designed, they have one function. You know how they all link together, and it's very easy to just go in. And as I say, we built this in an afternoon, put it straight in, and it worked. We were seriously shocked, but proof is in the pudding, so.
Yeah, there's no on-demand stuff. You've already worked it out. You know what methods you need because you've called them all out in your process diagram. It's just the actual development part becomes much simpler, and there's very little decisions to be made while you're doing the development. Sometimes you do come over things, and then it just kind of goes back into the process diagram and then back through again. But speeded up the development side and made it much more robust.
Yep.
So just to recap then, try not to go it alone. Make sure you process it, process flows, diagram it, and then build it last. Really make sure you try and highlight that. You work through all of the process, diagram it all out before you actually start delving deep into the code.
Yep.
Don't test in production. Really avoid that one. Make sure you test it as well as you can before you release. That certainly improves the resilience of your applications. And try this technique. Try this technique of having objects or classes that represent tables. I think you'd be amazed at how much simpler it makes building your applications and how much more logically structured they are. This is every application we build now is built exactly this way. We don't even entertain doing it a different way.
Yep. That's it. So
thank you very much.
Very much. Short session, but Q&A, questions. Going to be busy. So we just got a mic coming around. Thank you. Just wait for the mic.
Hey, hello. Hey, thank you. This is very informative, and I learned a lot today. Whatever the applications you showed there, are they available in Share that we can just go through, like how you built it? Can we see? Is there a way that we can get one of your small applications that you implemented all these best practices, such we can use as a reference?
I'm really sorry, I'm struggling to hear you. Can we turn up a little bit?
You showed a couple of examples, right? So are they available in Share that we can download and see the code, like how you built it? What is the methodology that you use?
Okay, so you want to see the code that we use to develop it? I don't have any examples on hand, and a lot of the code that we built this in is in kind of private domain because of the nature of it. But we could certainly sort something out. I don't have anything to give you right now, but by all means.
Just a sample application, like how it is, so we can see that as a reference.
Sure. It's the same as building your script includes normally, anything that you're building, but it's the fact that you're taking the thinking side of it out of the equation when you're doing the coding. You're not solving a problem at that point because you've already solved the problem, you're just building the code. Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone that's left.
So I just, to reinforce what you were saying about testing,
Yep.
writing your test scripts or your testing before you code, one thing that I've found is that if you're doing it the opposite way, if you've already coded it and then you're writing your test script, it's not a valid test, right? Because you know what the code is supposed to do and you're going to have a tendency to write the test based on what the code is supposed to do, not what the code does do, not what
Absolutely.
requirements were, right? So
absolutely. I think
force that.
Yeah, so we test, any testing is better than no testing. So, if you can validate the fact that you're putting something in and getting something out after you've coded the function, at least if it changes, you're going to know about it. But you're absolutely right, it doesn't cater for, the other side of things where you're kind of doing deliberate break testing. But, thank you.
Hello. Again, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative.
Thank you.
You remind me of my professor in the university. So I just was curious, what does Whitespace do, and also why is your application so large?
Why is it? Very good question. Why is our application so large? Because it is an integration platform. So part of what Tim and I have done, this is a little bit of a history, I guess, more history. We've been heavily involved in integrations pretty much since we moved into ServiceNow. And this is kind of really complex, asynchronous, bidirectional ticket exchange kind of stuff. And we built an app to support all of that. And there's a whole load of moving parts that go into that. And it's just very, very complicated. And that's why typically when you look at these in sort of organizations, they tend to get unsupported, they're difficult to maintain. And so the reason there's so much code is because it's just supporting that whole foundation of making it easy to build, taking all of the risk out of coding something yourself. And because of all the different kind of scenarios that we've seen, it's catering for there's edge use cases in there. But yeah, we don't typically, as I say, we don't typically build apps that big, but it applies nevertheless. And I think that's kind of where, because it is so big, we know it works. And it's 2.5 years old now, and it's still brilliant. Every time we go into it and we add something new, it's like, this is brilliant. Just everything drops straight in. We update the documentation, amend the flow diagrams, amend the tables as we need to, and yeah, it's great. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. One other thing, what level of detail do you go to when you're doing your Visio?
As much as you can. You need to go through all of the process decisions. Any decision point in your application, I think you need to be visioing it out, because I think what you'll discover is something what seemed like a very easy and benign decision might actually have a lot of ramification for how you decided you were going to structure it. So you need to go through every decision point all the way through.
And that really comes back to why it's important to get someone else to look at it, because you'll never think of everything. Even if you sat there for 2 weeks, you wouldn't think of everything. Whereas you could get on the phone with someone and run through it, and they would call stuff out that you hadn't thought of in half an hour. And I'm speaking from experience there numerous times. I'm doing this thing, I think I've got it right, and then it's, oh, what about this? And just, as Tim says, document as much as you can. We tend to go for, you get the process designed, and then once that's agreed, then that's when you sort of backfill into the objects that you're going to create and the method names and stuff like that.
It has to be within reason, because you might not know everything when you start. But I think as you understand it, or as you're working through with a client, or try and get the big picture, try and go through as much of it as you can up front. I think if you try and hit all of those decision points there and then, you'll hit most of the main ones there. And then, sure, there might be changes going forwards, but I think if you've got the main gist, then you're going to be okay to kind of extend it and adapt it. If you don't and it goes completely different, then something went wrong with the probably initial requirements in getting it. But try to go into as much detail as you can.
So just to sort of go back to this, we've got 2 boxes here. Each of these is kind of an action that's going to happen. And that's why it's grouped together as that flow. And then we've got the subflows, with the boxes with the 2 lines down the side. And anytime you see a subflow, map it out, unless it's not something that you're going to be designing. But yeah, this is pretty much as much detail as we go into, because it's all we need. As I say, we are missing the code descriptions on there, so we've got the pointer. So we've got. Oh. So this one here is kind of a description of what's going on. We would use something like that says this is the method name, and then because that's in there, we then just go through. I just create all the method names, and that's all you need really. As long as you understand how it works, and someone else that comes and looks at it can understand how it works, or even you design it, you give it to someone else, they build it. You're taking that risk of having to solution design on the fly out of the equation.
That's right.
How do you keep your application in sync with major ServiceNow platform upgrades? Because don't schemas change with every major iteration, depending on what take?
Great question. So the question was, how do we keep our app up to date with all the different versions of ServiceNow coming out? We asked ourselves the same question when we started. We were thinking, right, we need 27 instances, all the different patch versions, all the different major versions. The reality is we build on the lowest version available, we test on the highest version, and actually we have an extra instance to test the one in between, but we just generally support the latest patch on that. We haven't had any issues so far.
We've had some, but we've fixed it. I mean, one of the ways that we combat this is that we actually release our applications with tests. We ship our application with tests. That way we can run the tests in situ. So whatever version, whatever patch the customer's running, whatever custom configuration they've done, we can run tests against that, and we know whether or not our application is performing as desired. I think that's the only way that you can be sure it's working in situ.
Does that answer your question at all?
Yes, and also I was wondering, does your application have a global scope context?
No.
You've been at it for so many years, obviously.
No, this is a scoped application, yeah. We've been through the fire of scopes, so.
Is that portability?
Yeah, I mean, it's a ServiceNow Store app, so we have to do it as a scoped app, yeah. Yeah. Yes.
More of comments than questions. I want to thank you both for the contributions you've made to the share site. The UI 16 developer patch, as well as Explore, are the first things I install on any new instance of ServiceNow.
Us too.
And if you're not using it, you guys really need to just look it up, and you'll be in love with it right away. So thank you for your contributions. And for the gentleman earlier who was asking about examples, I assume those update sets and share were using the same principles and methodologies that you put into your store app, correct?
Yes, I think probably not to the degree that we would like, honestly. I think so.
They predated this. So this kind of technique really came about when we built Unify because of the complexity and the size. And we were just so blown away with how well it worked. We've adopted it from there forwards, and that's why I wanted to share it. But certainly, kind of going forwards, we've
always had coding standards. We've always had, documentation standards, and naming standards is another really important one to have as well. And making sure that whatever you're building is as self-documenting as it can be. But inevitably, we end up in the situation where we build something on our own, we power ahead, it breaks, and that whole thing. So the stuff on share has been refined, refactored a lot of times. I'm not ashamed of what's up there, put it that way. Thank you. Got a lot of questions over here. Yep, go. I can hear you.
You mentioned automated tests.
Yep.
And you also mentioned that you had test cases written down before you coded anything.
Yep.
So did you write those automated tests before starting to code and tedious
So when we started this, we actually did an import of Jasmine into ServiceNow. It's available on Share called Spoke, and we built BGD tests for what we needed in that time. I think going back to the comment earlier about, if you build your tests after the case that you've done them, there was an element of that, but again, it's better than nothing. They do. It's a limited version, as far as I know. But yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Hello. How do you store and track your artifacts, like your Visio? Like each time you upgrade, do you make a copy of the Visio so that you have the original? And how do you keep track of all that?
Do you want something?
That's a good question. Yeah, we do track some of the older versions. It depends on how big a change it is and whereabouts we are in the process. So if it's like the initial kind of design and we're iterating through and things are changing, then typically we just update the same diagram. And then until we get to a point where we're happy and we do the build. And then from that point, if we're making kind of changes to it, we will just version the files. We just do like a naming convention to version where we are. Or if we're doing an extension, so the Polar example, for instance, the Polar example was just a separate, separate kind of process flow to flow out that piece of logic.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the Unify. You mentioned it's an integration tool. Can you explain more how it works? Is it like...
Come and speak to us afterwards.
Okay.
I'm not going to bore everyone with marketing, sales kind of stuff. So.
Okay, I will...
Thank you anyway.
Discuss with you afterwards.
Honestly, we could talk about Unify all day, every day,
we'd be getting bored.
2 weeks.
Yeah, because we have a particular situation. We use ServiceNow, but some other teams use Jira. So we ended up with 2 systems, and we're looking for a solution that we can integrate the 2.
Brilliant. Happy to have a chat afterwards. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Is there any more questions?
Nope.
We've got a gentleman just...
Thank you for sharing your methodology. I just had a quick question about keeping your eye on sort of the bigger picture and where you draw the line between that and... Thank you. Where you draw the line between keeping your eye on the bigger picture and just how complicated these Visio diagrams get before you actually get into coding. Because you mentioned coding last, but if you're trying to think through scenarios, I'm sure these can get quite complicated as well. So do you have any advice for where you draw the line before you actually get into building? Or?
Yeah, I think just by having it in the diagrams, it's just easier to keep your eye on the bigger picture. You still need to be a bit careful of not getting lost in the weeds, but I don't really know how to describe it. I just find it much easier to see on the kind of process flow diagram where everything is, as opposed to being in the code. I think it's more down to investment. The idea of I'm just less attached to the diagram, and I've got less time invested in the diagram as opposed to I am in the code. So when you're deep in the code and you've been doing it for a while, you might come across the fact that it's not right, and you often get a feel. You'll get that gut feel of like this is just not working. But because you're so invested with it, it's very hard to throw it away. Whereas I think what we found with the diagrams is it's really easy to just, if we need to throw the diagram away, we can, but more often than not, you can just tweak it and move it around. But I guess you just need to kind of go back and keep thinking, what is the overall picture? How do we go, and try and keep the diagrams as simple, relatively simple, and kind of break out the processes so it's easier to follow it through at a higher level. You don't want a massive kind of A1 size diagram with loads of complexity. That's going to be very difficult to see. But smaller diagrams, sub processes called out if need be.
Yeah.
No problem. You're welcome.
Yes.
One more question. So, did you follow any best practice or book or method for this diagramming and human development?
I wish I could say we did. It really has been a journey. We
definitely read best practice books. We're interested in development, interested in design and architecture, so read books, take courses and stuff. But as opposed to really following one of those processes kind of really religiously and doing it that way, I think you just learn as you go and use those techniques, and we kind of put all those together to come up with this, really.
Sorry, I can't give you the name of a book to read. But
So I just curious about, if it was like a process that you learned over time or something that you followed.
Yeah, as you said, it was just a process.
Definitely learned over time, but then certainly components of it from proper processes.
Yeah. I think I think the cherry on top is aligning this with your object model in your scripts and stuff. That was just the revolutionary factor in this was like, oh, actually, we can design this and use it to build stuff with. It's not just about the user experience kind of thing or the state flow or something like that. Those are all important, but they don't give you the kind of level that you need in your code. I think it's applying that kind of logic that you would get in any kind of good project that's going on is, what does the user do? How are they going to be interacting with it? And then just applying that to the code, and then it kind of follows on from there. So, yeah. You're welcome.
Please don't forget to fill out your surveys after this session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.